Okay, so Indonesia and Palestine, they go way back. Indonesia has always been a huge champion of the Palestinian cause. So when they announced they were sending troops to Gaza, you'd think it's a pretty straightforward show of support. But here's the twist. This is not a UN mission. It's a brand new, US-led initiative, and that has a lot of critics seriously worried. So is Indonesia actually helping, or are they walking right into a trap? Let's get into it.
All right, so what does this deployment actually look like? Well, Indonesia is committing a lot of troops. But, it's not really the number of soldiers that has people raising their eyebrows. It's who they'll be working for.
First number to keep in your head, 1,000. That's the number of Indonesian soldiers that are getting ready to deploy to Gaza, and fast. We're talking boots on the ground as soon as this April.
But hold on, 1,000 is just the opening act. Indonesia has actually pledged a grand total of 8,000 personnel for this mission. That's a huge deal. It makes them a major player in this whole operation.
And get this is Indonesia's biggest peacekeeping mission ever. And they're doing it in a place where they don't even have diplomatic relations with Israel. So yeah, why on earth are so many people calling it a trap? Well, to figure that out, we have to look at who's really pulling the strings.
And this is where things get interesting. See, these Indonesian forces, they're not going to be wearing those famous UN blue helmets. Nope. They're joining a brand new US-led initiative called the Board of Peace.
So this Board of Peace was set up by the Trump administration. On paper, its goal is to create an International Stabilization Force to bring stability to Gaza. Sounds good, right? But when you start to peel back the layers and look at who's actually on this board, well, you start to see a very specific and some would say pretty lopsided power dynamic.
Just take a look at the executive committee here. I mean, it's basically a who's who of Western political and financial power. You've got President Trump and his senior advisor Jared Kushner right at the top, along with other high-level U.S. officials. Then you have figures like former U.K. Prime Minister Tony Blair and the president of the World Bank. Now think for a second. Who are we not seeing in a leadership role here? Exactly. Any Palestinians.
And this slide, wow. This just lays it all out, doesn't it? On one side, you have the leadership, completely dominated by Western figures making all the big decisions. And on the other side, the Palestinian role is boiled down to a transitional committee of technocrats. I mean, critics are jumping all over this, saying it basically turns Palestinians into objects to be managed, not partners in their own future.
Okay, so with this crazy power imbalance, how does it all turn into a potential trap for Indonesia? Well, it really boils down to the fear of being used, like a pawn in a much bigger chess game.
The big fear here, the real worry, is that without the UN acting as a neutral referee, Indonesia's good reputation, as a friend to Palestine, could be hijacked. Hijacked to give legitimacy to a plan that a lot of people feel is really just about serving US and Israeli interests above all else.
And don't just take my word for it. Listen to how Shofwan Al-Banaqwaruzad, an expert at the University of Indonesia, puts it. He says, quote, "We are afraid that Indonesia will be used as the buffer to control the Palestinians." I mean, that's blunt. There's a genuine fear that the Indonesian army could end up being the friendly face on what is essentially an occupation force.
And he doesn't stop there. He uses this term, shock absorber. Now, what does that mean? Well, think about it. It means Indonesian troops could be placed right in the middle, taking the heat from Palestinian anger and resistance, basically acting as a human shield for Israeli forces.
And this all leads to the central criticism, right? The idea is that this whole plan isn't about creating real peace, a positive peace based on justice and rights for Palestinians. No, the goal is what's called negative peace, which is simply the absence of fighting. And that's why critics are calling the whole design colonial. It's not about partnership, it's about control.
So, you're probably thinking, with all these red flags, why in the world would Indonesia's new president, Prabowo Subianto, sign up for this? Well, the answer seems to be all about his own ambitions for Indonesia on the world stage, and maybe for himself too.
Yeah, analysts are pointing to this as a classic move from President Prabowo's very personalized foreign policy. He has this big vision of making Indonesia a global heavyweight, and this mission looks like a shortcut to getting a seat at the big kids' table.
And if you look at his recent moves, you can see the pattern clear as day. First presidential trip, China. He meets with Putin in Russia. And the thinking is, all of this was calculated to get on Donald Trump's radar. So what comes next? He signs on to the Board of Peace, and boom, almost immediately a new trade deal with the US is in the works.
So if we were to break down the real motivations here, as this chart kind of suggests, it seems this is less about the situation in Gaza and much more about a strategic play. Analysts figure it's a mix of wanting to boost Indonesia's global status, getting good with the US, and lock down some really important economic benefits like that trade deal.
All of this brings us right back to the central question, the big dilemma at the heart of Indonesia's Gaza gamble. Is this actually about solidarity, or is it all strategy?
You really have two competing stories here. Officially, the Indonesian government says this is all about solidarity, supporting Palestinian independence, providing humanitarian aid. But look closer, and a lot of observers see a totally different playbook: gaining global clout, scoring economic wins with the US, and cementing a powerful legacy for President Prabowo. The country is really caught between its long-held principles and its new leader's big ambitions.
And that leaves us with this one final, massive question. Is it even possible to support Palestinian independence by joining a plan that gives Palestinians themselves no real voice? That is the incredibly tough question that Indonesia, and frankly the rest of the world, are left to grapple with.